I think from 150, 200 people attended this. You know, so I wanted to introduce our Mr. V. Raju very quickly to all of you. Although you know him for long, but you have to have little bit more background. You should understand about him. He started his career almost 39 years ago, and last 37 years in the UV water purification segment only. He worked closely and actively on the fields of various industries: pharmaceuticals, bulk drugs, beverages, food, paints, breweries, distilleries, automobiles, to understand the need of bacteria-free processed water, their norms, and how to provide them a cost-effective and reliable solution to their bacteriological problems using UV technology. He is basically an application specialist on UV for various industries. He has been closely involved and instrumental in design and development of UV system for residential and industrial applications. He's also board members of IUVA, International Ultraviolet Association US. He's the current member of our Standard Subcommittee of Water Quality India Association, and also he's the BIS Technical Committee for the Drinking Water and Carbonated Beverages Sectional Committee FAD 14, representing WQIA. Many of you maybe know it, but I just wanted to bring to the your all attention is that Water Quality India Association is officially, we have registered as an association in the BIS stand FAD committee, FAD 14, Food and Agriculture Department 14, and FAD 30. So our Raju is representing the former WQI in FAD 14 committee. He has written various articles on UV purification in industrial journals, including Pharma Times, EA Water, Wastewater Journals, Food Technology Journals, etc. He is currently director at Ace Hygiene Products Private Limited, which manufactures and promotes the popular Alpha brand of UV disinfection systems, and associated with them for almost last 33 years. It's a very almost more than 3 decades with Alpha UV. Before I hand over to Mr. V. A. Raju to deliver his lecture, uh, I I request all of you to just introduce yourself through a topic which we'll take up in the end of the session. So over to Mr. V. A. Raju. Welcome.
Thank you, Chandu, and good morning to all of you. Well, it's UV has been a passion for me. You know, I've been in the industry now for the last, as Chandu says, for the last 38, 39 years. And every day passes by with learning something new. The application of UV is something which is very interesting. When I was in the industry, and meaning earlier, I'm talking about way back in the 80s when we used to move on the field, it was perceived that UV was a magic band. You know, you put in something and then it gets disinfected. But then when they actually tried it out on the field and they put it on use in the process, they realized that no, it's quite inconsistent. It doesn't work the way it's supposed to work. So to that particular extent, we had to get into the depth of the subject, understand the subject, and then offer solutions to the industry. So primarily, it's a application of a principle of science, which is well proven, time tested over time now. In fact, the first UV system commercially, which was built, was way back in 1901 in France. That's the history of UV. So it's now over 100 years since the technology has been in use, and it's developed, and it's got, refined and better in terms of finding newer applications for industrial use. This session today will primarily cover some basic fundamentals and try to, throw light on what the subject is and what are the common misconceptions that people do have on UV, and the applications and the sizing. We may not have time today for completing the entire session because it's not a small subject which can get covered in 1 hour's time. So I was telling Chandu that we may require 2 sessions based on how this goes. If required, we'll get into a second session to take the sizing aspects of UV into consideration. So we'll just start. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Yeah, Raju, we can see. Please go ahead.
Okay, so here we are covering some fundamentals. Let's look at 1 minute. I'll just set my.
You can't see your screen?
I can see my screen, but I'm just trying to set up this. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's look at what is UV. It's basically nature's way of purification. Primarily, it's an invisible light in the electromagnetic spectrum. It's a band of invisible light. It's a non-chemical technology with no disinfection byproducts. And most importantly, there are no known microorganisms that are resistant to UV. So if you see the electromagnetic spectrum, you will find that it lies in between the X-rays and the visible rays. What is important is UV is invisible. So it lies in between 100 nanometers to 400 nanometers in the electromagnetic spectrum. And in the 100 and 400 nanometers, what is most important is primarily the germicidal UV. Well, what we call it the UVC. We have UV divided into UVA, B, C, and vacuum UV. The UVC is of most interest to us, which has got the peak germicidal efficiency. So 200 to 280 nanometers is the wavelength in which we basically get the maximum disinfection efficiency. Out of that, the 254 nanometer wavelength has got a peak germicidal efficiency. So today, most of the lamps that we get or which we use in the industry are more or less monochromatic lamps which have got the output of 254 nanometers. Because that has got the maximum germicidal efficiency. The kill ratio is maximum in that particular wavelength. This is what you will see. The UVA, the UVB, the UVC, and the UVD, that's 315 to 400. This is the black light. The suntan, you get suntan in UVB. UVC, you get the germicidal. And then you have the vacuum UV. That's the 100 to 200 nanometers. Now what happens here is basically the energy keeps increasing as the wavelength reduces. So lower the wavelength, higher the energy. So typically when we use the 185 nanometer wavelength, it has got a higher energy. We use that for applications like, TOC reduction and things like that. The normal wavelength which we use for water treatment and water purification is the 254 nanometers, which comes in this particular wavelength. Now, the source of UV which we use is primarily a lamp. Nature has got its own UV coming in from the sun. Historically, we've known UV to be, I mean, the sun to be very useful for disinfection, though we did not know how and why at that given point in time. For centuries, we've been using pickles to be kept out in the sun so that it doesn't reduce its shelf life. The shelf life of pickles keeps increasing when you dry it out in the sun. At that time, we did not know what the technology was. But then later we learned that it was the UV radiation in the sun's rays, which was effective in primarily giving us that effect. So when you expose the pickles to the sun, primarily it gets disinfected because of this particular wavelength that exists in the sun's radiation. So now that takes a very, very long time if you have to leave everything out in the sun for exposure to UV. So lamps have been developed which primarily give us specific monochromatic wavelengths so that UV radiation of 254 nanometers is emitted from these particular lamps. So various types of lamps are available, but primarily the lamp is the source of giving us UV, which we use. So UV lamps is one of the main components of giving us the UV energy. Now, how does UV actually work? When UV light is exposed to any organism, the genetic components of the organism primarily absorb the UV light and disrupt the DNA and thus kill the microorganism. It cannot reactivate once it is exposed properly to the UV light that is incident on it. So that's how this primarily works. Let's look at what the basic UV system components are. One is we have a reactor. The reactor basically is through which the water actually passes through. It has got a quartz sleeve enclosure within the reactor. It has got the lamps which are enclosed or encapsulated within the quartz so that water doesn't come in contact with the lamps. So this is the UV reactor chamber. Primarily, most of the reactor chambers that you will find are in stainless steel. Based on the applications, you use either 304, 316, 316L. So different kinds of material are used. Aluminum is also used in terms of reactor vessels in some cases. But world over, most preferred material for the reactor is in stainless steel. So if you see the vessel, you have an inlet, you have an outlet, you have the UV lamp which is within that, and you have a quartz jacket around the UV lamp. We also have baffle plates that are put into some applications where we require higher doses and to ensure that the flow is a turbulent flow. So typically the chamber, the stainless steel reactor that is there plays a very vital role in the design of a system. It's just not one pipe having an inlet and an outlet, but it is designed specifically to ensure that we have the maximum contact time of organism to UV. Now, this is again another very important element of the UV system. That's the control panel. The control panel is actually driving the UV lamp, and it is also giving us various inputs based on what's the controls that have been put into for monitoring the system. The most important element is to make sure that the drivers or the ballasts that are used in the system are appropriate and properly designed for the lamps that are chosen. Very often, what happens is we have lamps. Let's assume that the lamp has got an 800 milliamp current requirement to drive the lamp to give the maximum UV output. But ballasts are giving an output of only 200 and 300 milliamps. So the lamp will glow, but the UV output from the lamp will be very low. So ballast is a very critical component that goes into the control panel, and it has to be properly designed and seen that it is configured with the lamps that are being used. Apart from all the other control features that are required to see that the system is functioning properly. So all that is in the control panel. Now the other element which is very important, especially in process, is the UV monitoring system. We have monitors which actually sense the UV output from the lamp. So these are exclusive 254 nanometer sensors that are used, which can monitor the UV output in terms of the intensity of the lamp and can give alerts in the event the lamp intensity comes down. So it's very important to have a fail-safe device. So this helps the device, UV device, to become fail-safe. So the user at any given point in time is aware that the system is delivering the efficiency that it is supposed to deliver. So in the event of low intensity, which can happen because of a variety of reasons, which we will get into subsequently, the monitor has got the capability to trip the entire line and see that the water flow through the system stops, so that unpurified water does not go through the system unintentionally for the user. So the user is always aware. So the monitor helps in doing that. The other important element is basically the wiper systems. There are automatic wiper systems which can get basically programmed to clean the quartz glass at regular intervals. So the quartz over a period of time, again, based on what kind of input water quality is given to the system, can get, coated or covered with, encrusted with salt or anything like that. So over a period of time, the UV output from the lamp through the quartz will reduce. The quartz is used here primarily to ensure that the light that is incident into the water stream doesn't get restricted. Any normal glass will block all UV, whereas quartz allows UV to get transmitted up to 93%. So quartz is specifically preferred out here. You would not be able to differentiate the difference between a normal glass and a quartz glass unless you put it through a UV monitor to ensure to know what is the UV output from the glass. So it's very difficult for you to judge by looking at the glass whether it is quartz or whether it is normal glass. But quartz is the material that is supposed to be used for any system. And we have a lot of players in the industry where normal glass is put and then they assume that it works because the lamp gives a blue light. The lamp blue light is just an indicator that the lamp is being struck, whereas it's not an indication that the UV is coming out from the lamp. So the UV light, as I explained to you, is invisible. You cannot see the UV light. It comes below the visible spectrum of light. So it's important that proper quartz is used and that quartz is cleaned at regular intervals if you want the efficiency of the system to be maintained at peak levels. So for that, the wiper systems are put into place. Now coming to the UV dose. For effective disinfection, the proper UV dose has to be provided. What do you mean by proper UV dose? We have to understand that every microorganism has a unique dose relation, which means that one particular dose may not be the same for another dose, for another organism. Okay, so there is a difference in the dose levels that are required for different organisms. So that particular dose needs to be provided for based on what kind of application the system is going to be used for. Right? If the proper dose is not provided, then the microorganism will not be inactivated and instead be put into a dormant state. The unit of measure for the dose is milliwatt seconds per square centimeter or millijoule seconds per square centimeter. Let's look at what this UV dose is all about. UV dose is UV intensity into the residence time. The UV intensity is in basically milliwatts per centimeter square, and residence time is measured in seconds. Let's look at how this UV intensity and what is this UV intensity and residence time. The UV intensity is defined primarily in terms of the lamp type, meaning how much output the lamp, UV output the lamp can give. What is the power of the lamp? The type of the lamp means whether it is a high output lamp, whether it's a low output lamp. We have different kinds of lamps that are available for different kinds of applications. Then the power of the lamp, whether it is a 8-watt lamp or 11-watt lamp or a 100-watt lamp or a 300-watt lamp. So based on what kind of power is required, the lamps are basically put into place. Then we have the reactor geometry. The geometry of the reactor is very, very critical to ensure that we get proper UV output. And finally, the water quality. The water quality in terms of what is the content of water. Like for example, if we have organic compounds that are present in water, they absorb UV. So we have to ensure that the organic load in water is reduced. Fine. If we have inorganics like iron and manganese that are present in water, again, they are UV absorbing inorganics. So they require to get control. So how does this be measured? It is being measured by virtue of the transmission. So the transmission, or what we call as the absorption coefficient of water. So the transmission primarily measures how much of UV is allowed through the water column. If the UV is allowed is going to be less, then the UV intensity would be low. And then we have finally these total suspended solids. Now suspended solids are also primarily to be removed when we use the UV system, because these provide a shield for microorganisms where the light intensity would not be incident on the organism. It would go on to the suspended solid, and that suspended solid will be a shield. So all these factors affect the lamp intensity. So we have the lamp type, the lamp power, the reactor geometry, and the water quality, specifically with reference to the transmission and the suspended solids. So if any of these are amiss, then the intensity is basically affected. And finally, the residence time. Basically, the residence time is a factor of the flow rate, the baffle designs, and the reactor designs. So this will ensure that the residence time is maximized. So flow rate means it's something like, typically like something like a geyser. Like most of us understand a geyser concept very easily. Meaning, let's look at an instantaneous type of geyser, for example. We have, suppose, a 1 kilowatt geyser, which is instantaneous, and we allow the flow of water to be very fast. What happens? The water temperature would be reduced because the contact time of water with the heating element would be low. The same thing if I have the same flow and increase the wattage of the system, meaning the geyser, suppose I take a 3 kilowatt geyser, then the water would be hotter. So similarly, in UV, though we don't have temperature as a factor, we have the UV intensity which is coming. If the intensity has to be high, the residence time has to be high. So higher the residence time, more the dose. Lower the residence time, less the dose. That's how it works. Now, online monitoring, as I explained, monitors help indicate low dose readings in the event of following factors. If there's turbidity in the water. For example, if there's turbidity in the water, what happens? The transmission gets affected. The UV output will get low. UV absorbing organic and inorganic matter. Okay, if they are present in the water, again, the low dose indication will come. If there is low voltage, if the voltage is low, then in systems where the ballasts are not controlled in terms of a constant wattage, the UV output will directly be proportional to the input voltage. So what happens if the input voltage reduces, the UV output also will reduce because the current to the lamp will reduce. If the current to the lamp reduces, the UV output automatically comes down. So in such a case also, basically the system would become ineffective in terms of giving you a low dose. Then there could be quartz class scaling. As I explained, over time the glass gets scaled with suspended impurities or with, hardness, temporary hardness that is there in the water. High and low wall temperature. The lamp wall temperature also plays a vital role in terms of seeing that the UV is optimized. So based on different kinds of lamps, their operating temperatures are different. Over time, the lamps will go weak. Each of the lamps have got a lamp life. So you will see an aging curve, which will keep coming down over time, whether it is 5,000 hours, 10,000 hours, or 20,000 hours, based on what kind of lamps are being used. Okay, the lamp would give an output which would be lower. So the system design basically should be considering at any given point of time the output of the system at the end of lamp life. So lamp life is a very critical output. So over time, as I say, the lamp will go weak and the UV output will reduce. And then the lamp also can fail. So in all these scenarios, the UV monitor will give you a low dose reading. So in a low dose reading, it can be again, linked up to controls like having solenoids on the line and tripping the line off if the dosage comes down, so that it becomes a fail-safe device. So this can be done only with the help of a monitor. Otherwise, you assume that the system is working. And the only thing that basically you can actually see is a blue light that is coming out from the system, and people think that it is working. Whereas that blue light doesn't indicate anything. It only indicates that the lamp has been struck. Whether it is giving a UV output or no is a question mark and not known unless you use a monitor. The monitors help in all these particular scenarios which happen and which are variables in the system. They are bound to happen. They are always going to be there, and you cannot determine that without the help of a monitor. It should be understood that these factors can occur at any given point of time and will adversely affect the quality of output water with respect to efficiency. So quite often when you go down, people say that it works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes. So there's no magic in this. It works when all the parameters are in control. It doesn't work when any of these parameters are not in control. Now the only factor is how would you be able to define whether it is working or not being working. The monitor helps you do all that. And this is primarily a dose chart. As you will see, different organisms have got different dose relations. This is primarily for a log3 reduction, which means a 99.9% disinfection for different kinds of organisms. UV is effective against all known microorganisms. Here you're seeing some list of bacteria. The next is spores. Then you have yeast, you have virus, you have algae, you have protozoa. You have different dose requirements for different kinds of organisms. So when you want a higher disinfection efficiency, like when you say, no, I don't want log 3, I want log 4, I want log 5, or I want log 6, which means I have to increase the dose accordingly. Okay, so each of the organisms, there is a known dose relation that is available through the scientific community, which has done work over the last many years, and we know what's the dose relation for what kind of organism that is there. Now, interestingly, drinking water is one of the most easiest to disinfect through UV. When you're having an application of drinking water, most of the drinking water means, when you're talking about drinking water, we are talking about water which is safe for consumption. Okay, that is potable water. Now, water which is safe for consumption or pathogenic microorganisms, meaning pathogenic microorganisms are those organisms which are disease causing. Okay, so those disease causing organisms require a very low dose. for disinfection through UV. In fact, most of the pathogenic organisms require a dose of less than 10,000 microwatt seconds per square centimeter. So that dose is very easily achievable when the application is for disinfection of drinking water. But as the requirements for processed water are concerned, the requirements could be much, much higher. The standard now, as we say, basically the SAFE standard, the NSF standard talks about a minimum dose of 40,000. Now 40,000 is good for basically a UV system, but most of the organisms are disinfected at doses less than 16,000 when you're talking about drinking water. Okay, so for drinking water, it's a very easy application for UV to be applied and get good water. Whereas for process and the applications, basically based on what kind of applications, the dose relations are totally different. Okay, so we may require to increase the dose. 40,000 may not be sufficient. We may go up to 60,000 in some particular cases. And the applications are higher, then we may go over 120,000 microwatt seconds per square centimeter. So organisms being the same, the application will make a difference and the log reductions will make a difference. So accordingly, the dose will change. These are all for a dose for a log 3 reduction. Now let's look at this. Normally when we talk about UV, we were talking about the reactor geometry and we were talking about the flow rate and the residence time. When we use UV, we normally don't allow a laminar flow to be considered in the design. So what is the laminar flow? Let's look at this. This is how an organism behaves in a laminar flow. So as you see, the organism is just going down straight and the exposure to the organism is very limited. Okay, the residence time also for this organism will be very less when the flow is going to be a laminar flow. Let's look at the next type of flow.
Hello, please mute yourself.
Let's look at the next type of flow, which we call as a cross flow or a short circuiting flow. This is another. This is how the flow dynamics behave in a vessel. The flow dynamics based on how the vessel is designed can give you a flow which is laminar, can give you a flow which is cross flow. Now let's look at a cross flow scenario. This is a cross flow scenario where the organism basically from inlet goes straight on to the outlet going across the vessel. This also basically doesn't give you a very good dose when the system geometry is in this particular scenario. Let's look at an ideal scenario. Ideal scenario is a scenario where there is a lot of turbulence within the vessel and the organism gets maximum exposure. This is how it will work. So flow dynamics and the reactor geometry play a very important role in ensuring that the UV dose is maximized. Because otherwise, you will find that the water just flows through, I mean, the organisms just flow through the vessel and the disinfection efficiencies are going to be low. So for all this, we use CFDs in terms of system design to make sure that, you know, the flow dynamics are appropriate for the dose levels that are required for the particular application. Now looking at the applications. Well, most of us know drinking water is one of the major applications for UV. Apart from drinking water, we have wastewater disinfection, we have industrial process water. In process water, we talk about things like you know, food, pharma, beverage, paints. Different industries have got different standards in terms of quality of water. So accordingly, we require to know what what's the requirement in terms of water quality, and then see that systems are designed for those kind of applications. Swimming pool disinfection, ozone destruction, TOC reduction, and advanced oxidation. These are all applications in UV which find good effectiveness when UV is used. Most common of them is basically drinking water and industrial process water. Most of us are exposed to drinking water. Okay, process water is a very typical application where a lot of knowledge is required of the process and the requirements of the industry to make sure that you are giving them what they need. Now, in the industrial process water, typically the requirement is validated every day. Let's take, for example, the pharmaceutical industry. In the pharmaceutical industry, the water quality is validated on a batch-to-batch basis, which means if a batch is made today, the water quality is tested in the lab after the batch is made, because they collect the water during the batch. It is tested. It takes 48 hours at least for the results to get released and confirmed. Until that time, the batch is in quarantine. It's not released, okay, until they confirm the water quality. So after it's confirmed that the water quality meets the requirement, only then that batch is released into the marketplace. So what happens is most of the time it becomes a post-mortem, meaning you realize that the water quality is meeting its requirement or not meeting its requirement because it takes 48 hours for the test to come out. So the batch is already manufactured and then kept into quarantine, and then you may realize that no, the water quality may not have let's look at different kinds of applications. The most common known, as you know, is the drinking water application, which is gravity-based, a centralized drinking water system, where UV is installed along with a pre-filtration on each line that requires purification. Now, mandatorily, no UV is installed on the line without a pre-treatment. We have to have adequate pre-treatment to ensure that the suspended solids in water or the organics or the inorganics which are likely to affect the water quality are basically treated before it goes into UV. As I explained, if you have a lot of suspended solids, they provide a shield for the organism to get not exposed to the UV. If it has got a lot of turbidity, the transmission of the water is going to get affected. If it has got iron, manganese, for example, these are UV absorbing compounds, which basically are going to again reduce the dose. So adequate pre-filtration has to be put before a UV system. And the water requires to be tested if you have to know what kind of impurities are existing in the water. So if it is going to be surface water, it's quite easy for us to know. In terms of treated municipal water, we know what are the kind of impurities. If it is going to be groundwater, accordingly, we require to see that the water is tested before we know exactly what kind of pre-treatment would be required to ensure that the UV will work. So pre-treatment is a very important element for a UV efficiency to take place. So in a centralized drinking water system, a separate drinking water line can be taken from the overhead tank to cater to multiple taps and outlets through the building. So normally what happens is if you're going to take the entire line, let's say you take a centralized line from the output of the overhead tank and give it straight to all the outlets in the building. That outlet would be going into bathrooms, it would be going into toilets, it would be going into kitchens, which may not be required for drinking water. So treating that entire volume of water may not be required because the application doesn't call for potable water in all the outlets. So in such a scenario, you can have a single outlet that is designed, especially in the project stage where a drinking water line is separated and given. So you can have a centralized system which is, tight, small, and effective in terms of being cost effective. So that's one thing that is possible in a centralized line, where a drinking water line is exclusively provided to every house in the apartment, and you have a centralized treatment system, whether it is with a sand filter, a carbon filter, a softener, based on what kind of water quality is there, you may require to provide the adequate pre-treatment to the UV and put it on the line. Now, UV then filters can be put after the overhead tank in the gravitational systems. We don't advocate storage of water as far as possible, because UV as a principle gives you disinfection on contact. It does not have any residual disinfection properties. So when UV is basically being used, water when it is in contact will give you the disinfection. After that, if there is contamination downstream subsequent in the lines, then that disinfection would not be effective. It would not remain in water. So there's no residual disinfection property that are left in treated water after UV. So ideally, we don't advocate storage of water after treatment. So UV would be normally advocated after the storage line, so that it's basically disinfected and downstream is taken care of. So typically you have a schematic where you have an underground raw water storage, you have an overhead tank filling pump, you have filtration, you have a softener based on what kind of water, you have an overhead tank which is a domestic water, you have a drinking water line, okay, which is separate, you have a centralized water purification, and then distribution to drinking water, and then domestic and flushing line can be separate. So typically at the time of the project, these things can be discussed with the clients and then accordingly advocated in terms of how to put the UV system or the centralized drinking water system into place. Now, quite a lot of buildings are getting into hydropneumatic systems. In the hydropneumatic systems, UV can be installed directly after the pump to purify all the domestic water supply. So here the UV is primarily sized based on the pump discharge. The maximum pump discharge is considered and UV is placed after the hydropneumatic pump. This will ensure that the complete water supply in the premises will be disinfected and safe potable water on demand. Eliminates the problem of contamination in the tank, because after the hydropneumatic system, there is no tank. And it's an attractive option for high-end luxury apartments, hotels, and hospitals, which now primarily are getting into hydropneumatic systems. So typically, if you see the flow schematic, you would find the underground storage tank, you have the filtration, you have the hydropneumatic pump, you have a pressure vessel, and then you have the UV system, basically, which is going into distribution. Now here again, the UV system has to be designed to take care of what kind of pressures are going to come in from the hydropneumatic system and make sure that, the hammering that is likely to happen through the hydropneumatic pump is not going directly into the UV system. So these are all precautions that need to be taken and for which you require to understand the application. In the water treatment plants, basically multi-building projects, UV system will be installed in the water treatment plant. Now, when it is centralized and it is at the base, before the distribution can start after. So here we normally advocate a minimum quantity of chlorine to ensure a residual effect. Because if it is going to be at the point of entry, this is a point of entry system. The point of entry system means the distribution network in place in terms of the tanks and in terms of the piping, and all these are likely to have contaminants in terms of biofouling that's likely to happen in all these places. So to ensure that this does not affect the quality of water which has been treated at the input level, a small dose of chlorine, which is very small, but which will give the disinfection, the residual effect that is required, is normally advocated. This is a schematic in a water treatment where you have a raw water tank, you have a sand filter, you have a carbon filter, you have a softener or an RO, then you have a UV. In terms of application, we also sometimes basically advocate the use of UV before the RO. Because if the bioburden load is high on the RO membrane, the membrane life comes down. So based on again what kind of application it is, we also advocate UV before the membrane to make sure that the membrane life is extended if the input feed is got a lot of bioburden. Because directly chlorine going into the RO is not again advocated. So chlorine, if there is some chlorine that is there in the raw water tank, that would be removed through the carbon filter. But in spite of that, if the carbon filter is bleeding and if the lines don't get sanitized at regular intervals, then we advocate a UV before the RO to see that the membrane life is extended. After the RO, again, basically we put in the UV, which was into storage or distribution. In the residential RO with TDS control, auto flush, normally these are the small units that are there, the point of use systems where UV is being put after the RO before the tank. And there is a TDS controller. So TDS controller, primarily if the TDS is low, you would bypass the RO. So what will happen is water which is bypassing the RO would come in without any treatment, meaning there will be no bacterial removal because the RO is bypassed. So in such a case, the UV will help. So UV will disinfect because there's already a good line of pre-treatment that is there before the RO. So if the TDS is going to be very low and you don't want all the water to go through the RO, so that water wastage is reduced and the TDS is not very, very low, you have basically a bypass valve from the RO going in onto the UV and into the tank. These are for high recovery system, basically where we have large membranes that are there in the system, the recovery being high. Again, we put in UV in the line where you will see just before the point of distribution, the UV is put into place. So we have a dual media filter, we have an anti-scaling dosing that happens. We have basically sediment in the carbon filter, a high pressure pump in the system feeding all the ROs, then the reject line going back into recirculation to see that we get higher recovery. Output then coming in basically through the storage tank of the customer, and then we have the UV. So we put UV after the storage tank in such a scenario. These are point of entry systems, primarily they, as I explained, large systems. Primary disinfection to raw water, eliminating or reducing the use of chlorination. Installed after the sand filter, carbon filter, and softener if applicable. Can be installed after the overhead tank of each building to prevent the chance of recontamination. And eliminates the need for expensive dechlorination before RO. Now coming to wastewater, it provides excellent disinfection. In wastewater, primarily, it's the tertiary stage that we use the UV. So we have the primary stage, the secondary stage, and then the tertiary stage. More often than not, wastewater has got only primary and secondary stage, and then it's discharged into the sewers to meet the PCB norms. But when you want to reuse the water, which is now the norm that is happening, where people cannot waste the water is being reused for utility applications. So in such a case, on the tertiary line, we basically put in the UV. Okay, so it provides excellent disinfection, and here you will notice that the treated wastewater after the secondary will have more than a million colony forming units per 100 ml of sample. This is a kind of load that comes in after the secondary treatment. So you can't use this directly into utilities. It requires proper disinfection. And here UV is a very good advocation. So here in the wastewater, primarily there's a lot of application of UV that can be done. So tertiary treated water may appear clean, meaning water goes through the tertiary line because it goes through filtration. The water may be clean, but the bacterial load in that water is very, very high. So disease-causing microorganisms must be disinfected before utility. So typically that water goes into, things like this where gardens are sprinkled along with that water. So infection happens through air, it happens through cuts and wounds, infection through direct contact. So that water is exposed to different people. It needs to be treated effectively. These are microorganisms that are typically present in wastewater. So we have viruses as well as bacteria, we have protozoa. So all these are present in basically wastewater that is there. And the diseases that can be caused because each of these organisms. So UV is the only technology which can provide the high level of disinfection required in a simple and cost-effective manner for wastewater applications. So if you see typically the wastewater recycling flow chart, we have pre-treated sewage or sludge that is coming in. It goes through sand filter, it goes through a carbon filter, it then goes through a UV and then goes into secondary use, gardening, boiler feed, cooling tower feed, or toilet flushing. Based on what kind of utility applications are there, you typically find a wastewater treatment plant having a primary, secondary, and a tertiary line treatment that is out there. Having the UV after the tertiary line, after the sand filter and the carbon filter is a good option for you to have effective recycling of wastewater. Reasons to choose UV over chlorine in wastewater is basically chlorine residual limits. For reuse, dechlorination might become essential. Okay, all applications may not allow chlorine to be present. So in such a case, UV becomes very useful. UV is a disinfection process which requires no chemicals and which generates no residue. So primarily, it's very useful to ensure that there are no byproducts that are available in water. It's a green technology. Trihalomethanes are common byproducts that are formed when chlorine is used. Okay, trihalomethanes are known to be cancer causing. So in quite a few places, chlorine is actually banned in European countries where they don't allow chlorine to be used because of this particular scenario. UV is environmentally friendly, produces no trihalomethanes or carcinogens. Land requirements where chlorine is used is very large. Large contact times are required for chlorination to provide adequate residence time. Whereas UV is delivered instantaneously, and there is no need for large tanks, leading to significant space and therefore cost saving. Operator safety is again another issue. Accidents pertaining to chlorine, leaks, and spills can lead to severe burns, permanent vision damage, and lung damage. UV disinfection presents no safety, handling, flammability, explosion issues. The risk of the operator exposure to UV is extremely low. Cost effectiveness: in most plants, sodium hypochlorite is used, which is expensive. UV, on the other hand, has a much lower operating cost, and for most users, the payback period is between 1 and 2 years. Okay, so that's after that, basically, it's only the running cost, which is very, very cost effective. Online checking and validation is another benefit that you have. Effectiveness of chlorine is difficult to monitor, requires periodic manual testing of free chlorine residues in water. UV, on the other hand, can provide online monitoring and provides convenient interfacing with most BMS systems. In building management systems, we can interface and automatically, trip lines, use whatever we want, etc. These are some special applications that we have. As I said, TOC is another application where the limits of TOC should be very, very low, especially in the pharmaceutical industry. I remember when when we used to work in the industry norms at that given time, they used to say, okay, it is okay to have, milligrams per liter. Now they're talking about PPT. They're not talking about ppm anymore. They're talking about PPT, parts per trillion. Okay, so to get that high level of reduction, the organic carbon load has to be reduced in the input water. Okay, and UV is effective there. Now there we use the 185 nanometer wavelength. We don't use the 254 nanometer. It's a shorter wavelength that is used, so it's got a higher energy. So what happens is the organic gets broken down into carbon dioxide and water, and therefore the total organic load comes down in the water stream. So UV has got an application out there with a different kind of lamp and a different kind of dose. The dose levels required there are pretty high. Okay. Ozone destruction is another application because basically ozone is not allowed down into process streams. So we use UV to see that it is destroyed before it goes into the process. Here again, we require very high doses. Okay, it requires a dose of greater than 1,20,000 microwatt seconds per square centimeter. The multiple units of conventional system would be required even for moderate flow rates. Typical loops where ozone destruction is required are at elevated temperatures where standard low pressure lamps are not suitable. So here we cannot use low pressure lamps. We have special lamps. We use amalgam lamps where temperature doesn't play a vital role because these are all maintained at hot water loops in the process. We also have cold water loops, okay, which require disinfection. So ozone destruction and cold water loops, primarily we have UV which is being applied. In ultra pure water purification systems, UVs are used for effective reduction of organics, commonly referred as TOC. TOC reduction typically takes place when the 185 nanometer wavelength lamps are used to emit wavelengths in 185 and 254 nanometer spectrum. Generated by a different quartz envelope material, the 185 nanometer wavelength for TOC reduction is shorter and consequently more powerful than a 254 nanometer wavelength. A minimum dose of 1,50,000 microwatt seconds per square centimeter is required for reduction. Since carbon dioxide is a natural byproduct of the process, a certain drop in the water resistivity will occur after the UV. This is caused by an ionizing charge, some organic elements holding after receiving UV energy. Using a final DI step will restore the water's conductivity and will further reduce the level of the remaining organic elements. So this is how we basically manage to see that the TOC is controlled. Sizing and selecting a unit and sizing a unit. Do we have time for this, Chandu, or do we take this in another session?
I suggest that. Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. What I suggest is that I think this is a very good background of the UV and its applications and all that you have captured. This sizing part, with some maybe some case studies or something, if you could put it, or some projects or something has been done in the past, maybe 2 or 3, so that will people have a better understanding. That's what I see that.
No, because this is ultimately the most important thing. One is understanding fundamentals. Second is understanding the applications. The third thing is what to use where and how to size it.
Exactly. So probably what I suggest is my point of view is that
this is something that's not going to happen in 5 minutes.
No. I also do not want that because if you probably you will agree with me that the discussion that happened, or the presentation you made up to this, is that completely good background of UV, its application in the different either in the wastewater or water, drinking water and other segments. But now it is more important because this is a practical aspect that you know so it takes some time and it needs some more explanation also, depending
Yeah.
upon so I probably feel is that maybe we'll come back with something on the selecting and sizing part with some, you are there for a long time, so maybe your experience on this sizing part with some case studies will really help our members to have a better understanding about how it has been done, and then how these things can be at the project level can be taken care of. So that's what I feel. So
Yeah, I mean, I think basically it's not something that is going to be completed in the time that we have got. In next 5 minutes, it's not something which people will understand.
okay,
And
so
unless we rush through it, and then it will be something being done for the sake of being done. So I
yeah,
would suggest that we have another session for another hour or so on another date, which is convenient,
yeah.
and then take up this particular topic separately.
So from here we will start
So
the part two.
as of now, yeah, as of now, whatever we've covered, if there are any queries and any
Right.
questions, we'd be pleased to take up now.
So let me put it in. So thank you, Raju, to capturing this in such a lucid manner. I think we had a very fundamentals of UVs, and how different kinds of microorganisms. I think many of people only think about bacteria, virus, but they should also see that molds and other organisms also taken care of, and also people have understood a little bit on what different UVs, and especially TOC also is something. UV also plays a big role there. So with that, I don't. Let me see that you can also check the post. I think if there are any more questions are there, particularly I can pick up. So all the participants request you to send. If somebody has sent, then we can pick up immediately. Or if you have any questions, you can post it so that quickly next five. It's already 12:10, so we'll take another 5 minutes. If you have any questions, then we can address that. And if you have any more questions, you can always post to us. We will ask the answers from Raju, and then we can pass on to him. So Raju, I have a question before. So if we all know that lamp hours in general is 9,000 hours, okay?
Not necessarily.
But
Meaning,
typically
based
we
on what
use.
kind of lamp is used, you have lamp lives going in from 6,000 hours going right up to 20,000 hours also.
Okay, so like typical in drinking water application and purifier, what is the life? It's 9,000 hours?
No, for low pressure lamps, primarily the ones which we use, like we say, the 8-watt lamp or the 11-watt lamp or the 16-watt lamp, primarily, the lamp lives that we prescribe are basically anywhere between 6 to 8,000 hours, based on the lamp manufacturer.
Okay.
Okay, whereas the larger lamps, basically the high output lamps or the 3 feet long lamps, etc., that are there, we have lives of about 9,000 hours.
Okay,
the G36 lamps and things like that. So based on what kind of lamp is used, the lamp life is defined by the manufacturer.
Correct. So that was the one thing,
That is
because most of the
based
time
on
we
the
hear about
aging.
9,000 hours. So, that's a typical, as soon as you talk about life of the lamp, they start saying about it's 9,000 hours,
So it would vary from lamp to lamp based on what is used.
Correct. And another interesting question, I don't know if anybody posted, then I can ask. As we all know that different doses are required. So then one question was always coming at is that, you know, if the lamp life is 9,000, less I'm more concerned with just my revolve around the 9,000 hours. So so because the lamp life, when we say of 9,000 hours, so what you see in a practical scenario, the dosage is there up to 9,000 hours, up to of that level, or the intensity lowers
See, as I
down.
told you, the dose is dependent on a variety of factors.
Correct.
One of them is the lamp. Okay. The lamp is only one element of the dose that is coming out into the system. The geometry of the vessel that is there, the flow dynamics that are provided for in the vessel, okay, the type of quartz envelope that is there, what is the depth of penetration that is there, meaning
Right.
I might have a single lamp and I might have a vessel. Let's consider I have a vessel which is a 3-inch diameter vessel and a single lamp, and I have a single lamp and an 8-inch diameter vessel.
Correct.
Okay. So in such a scenario, the UV output through the system is going to be practically not there in an 8-inch diameter, because there is no transmission that is happening at that depth at all. So the design of the vessel is very, very critical.
Absolutely.
And the transmission through the system, meaning the water quality transmission is very, very important. I have seen water qualities which have got transmission of 90%, and I have also seen water qualities which have got transmission of only 60%. And that
Right.
too in India. Okay, I'm talking about drinking water.
Right.
Process water is a different application, meaning where the pre-treatment is very good, ultra pure water is used, then the transmission is much better. But when I'm talking about raw water, you have transmissions going from 60% right up to 90%. So when my transmission is going to be 60% of the water column, then the UV output from that system is going to be drastically low. So
Drastically low. Yeah.
so if you see a system that is designed, if you see any one of our technical brochures, you will find that the system is designed for a 0.1 absorption coefficient. So people don't understand what that means at all.
No.
0.1 absorption coefficient means a 90% transmission of water. So if the transmission levels is going to be 80%, for example, the UV output from that system will not be 40,000.
Yes, I think that is something, you know, whenever we have many discussions here and some people ask, I think it's all important about the quality of water, you know,
The
and
quality of water plays a very vital role with reference to the absorption coefficient that is available for the UV system to function efficiently. Now, people don't
because
understand that. They think
yeah,
it is a pipe, it is a UV lamp, and then it will give you magic. And then when it
exactly,
doesn't work, they don't understand why it doesn't work.
because our magician here is feed water. You know, I always see that, you know, in our water purification, the main magician, you know, who will actually manipulate everything, you know, in a system, is our input water. So
Correct.
as the input water, that's a magician. So that magician sometimes play very high level tricks with all the gadgets start failing, you know. So that's
Mm-hmm.
how I always see that, you know. So whenever we had a discussion with many, sometime people ask, then I said, man, first check your feed water. All other things of discussion of no use, because you seeing the feed water, you can't make anything unless and until you really test it, you know.
Correct.
So
So unless the input water quality is tested, you will not be able to know what kind of pre-treatment is required to see that the efficiency of the system is what it is supposed to be. So that's a
absolutely.
very critical element if the system has to work efficiently. I saw a question from somebody, Dimple.
Dimple,
Okay, for
yes.
swimming pool application, what is the UV intensity requirement? See, a swimming pool application would basically mean the uh, drinking water requirements that are there, because people are likely to drink it. Okay, it could be swallowed and therefore it has to be safe for potable water. Now, normal potable water requirements, basically the intensity, again, depending on what kind of input feed is available by virtue of transmission and turbidity and things like that. The normal dose that is advocated is anywhere between 30 to 40,000. If you're talking about the standard, then 40,000 microwatt seconds per square centimeter is the norm that is required.
Okay.
Uh, Chandrasekhar sir.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Raju sir, this is Muktesh. So
Yeah,
as you said, in the commercial water systems, you have the monitors, basically UV monitors. So in residential systems, how to monitor that intensity or transmittance?
There is
So
no
most
shortcut to a monitoring device. Monitoring device is a very expensive device. Okay, it's not something which is cheap. In the residential system, you want to give a system which is within 5,000 rupees and 10,000 rupees, whereas monitors themselves cost anywhere between 30 to 40,000 rupees. Okay, so it is basically possible for us to do that kind of monitoring in process applications where it is a critical application. Now, in terms of residential applications, the thing that you require to make sure is that the system is functional, and if it is not functional, then it requires to basically trip. So you can be have that, you're checking the light intensity. It does not check the UV output. A photosensor basically only is measuring the light output that is coming out from the lamp. So if the light output comes down, it could come down because of a low voltage. It could come down because of scaling over the quartz. So that's a cheaper option in terms of having a photoresistor that is there in the vessel for you to monitor that. But there also the photoresistors, they could get short, okay, they could fail. Service staff could bypass them. So these are all problems that are basically there in photoresistors as well. So ideally, what you can do is have a current sensing device in the system to ensure that the current that is provided is appropriate to the lamp. If the lamp current is appropriate, then you can get an alarm onto that, you can get a solenoid onto that and see that the system is tripped off. So they are provided for, but it will not measure the UV output per se. Dose is not measured. So
Yes.
these are cheaper ways for you to see that something is there in the device to make sure that you don't get misled by that lamp being on.
Yeah, sir, thank you very much. So that UV fail alarms, current sensors, everything are in place in the systems. But when I receive a UV barrel from any vendor, so I should be ensure that he is using the proper quad sleeve, not the glass one. So UV, I understood. What about the transmittance? So is there any way to understand rather than the microbiological test? See, whenever we receive any quality
You have
parts.
to have a UV monitor. You have to have a UV monitor which can measure the output from the system. So you will have to make an arrangement where that monitor probe can be basically put onto the vessel and check whether the output is good or not.
Okay, so fine. Thank you, sir.
Raju sir, my question is actually how effective UV in wastewater? Because most of the some installations, this is my perception, all like exhibition box, it is not working or not effective. So what's your comment on that? Wastewater
I agree,
UV.
most of the plants that even I have seen on the field, whether it is for wastewater or whether it is for process water, are showpieces, where people really don't know whether it is working or not, and they assume that it is working. Because you have a UV system and because you have a green lamp that is coming out from the system, people assume that it is working until you do a microbial test. Only when you do a microbial test, the output, you realize whether the system is actually working or not working. Okay, so in a well-designed system where the dose is properly provided for and the system is basically put into place after checking what's the kind of transmission and things like that, the system works very well. We've had no failures of systems that have been put into wastewater applications.
Okay. This applies for both
Depends on how
ATP
the
as well
system
as.
is selected and sized. What kind of system is put into place and what's the design, what's the dose that is being provided for. Because in wastewater, typically the transmission comes down to as low as 50%. So if the system is not designed for that kind of transmission, then it will not work.
So this is applicable for ETP as well as STP.
Yeah.
Okay. And any comparison on UV with the ozone?
UV with ozone.
Yeah.
Meaning you want to compare UV as a disinfectant, possible. Meaning both are disinfectants. Okay. Meaning ozone oxidation levels are very high, because of which you get disinfection. You have a free ozone oxygen which element which is basically allowed into the water where disinfection happens. Whereas here it is a physical process. There it is more of a chemical process in ozone. Monitoring of ozone, seeing that the dose of ozone, etc., in terms of controls are a different ball game altogether. They're not very easy to establish and easy for people to use. So keeping all those things in mind, if you're talking about a user-friendly application, UV is a far more user-friendly application. Both of them are disinfectants. They provide disinfection. There's no they have to be a more cost-effective solution, a user-friendly application, which is going to be beneficial in a particular application, has to be seen and accordingly being used.
Okay, so
one more question, Chandrasekhar. Lot of people are manufacturing now lamps. So any lamp can be used for already there are some setups are there. So we can choose any type of lamp. Now Philips is coming. Lot of people, Bajaj is having lamps. So what's your comment on that? The UV lamp alone.
Bajaj doesn't make germicidal lamps. See, these lamps are all specialty lamps, as we call them. They don't come under the conventional lamps that are there. There are very few people in specialty lamps across the globe. In fact, Philips has got specialty lamps division. Osram has got a specialty lamps division. In the US, we have lamps which basically give very much higher outputs. Okay, so we have different kinds of lamps which are being used. You have to be very particular about what kind of outputs these lamps are providing, what kind of lamp life they have been providing, what's the data sheet that the manufacturer has got. All those things have to be looked into. They are not conventional standard lamps which Bajaj and all make. Bajaj doesn't make these lamps at all.
Thank you so much, sir.
Raju,
what is your view on the UV LEDs? Now it is a recent trend. They're is coming up with UV LEDs. They are claiming no preheating is required, minimalistic design, and so what is your view on that?
UV LEDs is an interesting development. Okay, now as of now, we still don't have UV LEDs which can give us large UV outputs with reference to commercial applications. The output from the UV LEDs are still very low. Okay, and if you want larger outputs, they are still not commercially viable in terms of putting it into use. But it's a very interesting development. Over time, I do see, because it's got a lot of benefits, there's no two ways about it. As a development, I see that over time, there will be UV LEDs which will be able to give higher outputs at much lower prices. Because today, the price comparison is not there, okay, for it to be commercially viable, where large flow rates are concerned, large UV outputs are concerned. Okay, for a small application, for a small flow rate, or for a storage type of model, etc., they are okay. That's where it is currently being used.
Okay.
But commercial applications, there is work that is being done. It's a very interesting development. I'm sure it has got a lot of scope, and over time, it is something that will, be the norm.
So you have any plans to enter into that segment?
As of now, none of our applications basically meet that requirement in terms of a commercial viability.
Okay, thank you.
So Raju, we have very quick 2 questions and then we will wind up. I think one question is what level of iron and manganese can reduce the, I think it's something like a concentration they're asking. And the second one is how to measure life of a lamp.
how to measure the life of the lamp. See, the life of the lamp, as I said, you require a monitoring device to see whether the output from the lamp is what it's claimed to be. Because the lamp manufacturer gives you an aging graph. When he gives you a lamp, he gives you the data sheet of an aging graph, where after 100 hours, this is the output, and after, say, 6,000 hours or 9,000 hours, this is the output from the lamp. Now that has to be measured only with a UV output, with a UV monitor. So unless you have a UV monitor, you would not know whether the lamp is giving you that particular output or no. And the only other way for you to validate it is in terms of having a bioburden test. So feed in bacteria at a known level and then check it at the output level. Then you'll know whether it is basically working or not. But otherwise, the UV monitor is a device that is normally being advocated.
Okay, last question. What is the impact of UV light on the plastic part like PP and ABS?
No, UV cannot, plastic basically cannot resist UV. They are all, any plastic, PP, ABS, etc. are UV degrading material. They'll get degraded very fast with exposure to UV. So that's why you will not find any UV enclosure which is in plastic bodies. You will find either some metal that is being used, whether it's stainless steel, which is the preferred material world over, or whether it is aluminium and material which will not degrade to UV. That is what is basically the norm that is used.
So Raju, I think it's already 12:30. So what I suggest my members is that keep all your questions, in one place, and we have a part 2, and you can join little early all that so that we can start in 10-15 minutes before to have those questions answered, and then you can start the part 2 of the presentation. So because it's already been 12:30, so I thank Mr. V.A. Raju for such a illustrative presentation, and I think we are all waiting for your part 2. I think that would be more interesting to see that the sizing, scaling, and how actually this application we heard about, but actually practically those application, how those are there in the fields and all. So we'll have a more insights on all this thing in your part 2 presentation, and looks like to me that our members will have more and more questions that time. So so let's see that how it works, and then we will try to answer as many as. And if members, you feel free to send your queries to the WhatsApp group, and Raju is there on the WhatsApp group. If anything related to presentation, he will definitely happy to answer in our group. Okay. So with that, once again, thanks, Raju.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Take care of yourself and all my members. Thank you, and be safe, stay healthy, and we'll meet again. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Very good presentation, Raju.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raju sir.